Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
What was that?
No matter what time zone you're in, Sip&Talkers, welcome back to Sip&Talk.
And welcome, everyone. It's great to be here.
You seem particularly energized today. Did you finally manage to get a full night's sleep instead of, reading those super dense reports on the U.S.-China tech war?
Oh, I got about 5 hours of sleep, so
Yeah.
not quite. But why are you talking like that?
What?
What's with your high-pitched voice today?
Huh? I don't know what you're talking about. Okay.
But hang on a minute.
Yeah.
I feel like you're setting me up for something.
No.
Didn't you tell me this morning that the outline was submitted?
Yeah.
Because I spent a good 20 minutes hunting for it in the cloud folder.
I was asleep by 9 p.m. last night, thank you very much. But yes, I did send a quick note saying it was on its way.
30 minutes late. So what's the defense?
Okay.
No, I want to hear it.
This was a white lie. I swear.
Oh, a white lie.
Yes. You see, last night, to get my cat to take his medication, I told him, this is the new fish paste flavor. And you know what? He believed me.
Oh, muffin. He'd.
Yeah.
Kind of sacrifice for the greater good.
As the heroic act of a cat savior.
I think that's fair. But this whole thing, it brings up the big question we need to get into today, right? We use these small lies to, keep the peace or avoid trouble in our lives.
Right.
But what happens when you scale that up? I mean, way up. When a state decides to use a massive national narrative, what some people call the big lie, for decades.
How does that leap in scale from mine, cat's medicine, to 1.4 billion people?
Yeah.
How does that change the whole game?
That is the perfect transition, because that leap is all about its core purpose, cognitive control.
Cognitive control.
Your lie was designed to control your cat's behavior, or maybe to control my emotional reaction to you being late. But when we talk about propaganda on a national scale, the kind that gets compared to the big lie, it's designed to control the collective thoughts and actions of millions and millions of people.
Exactly. And that is the core of our conversation today. We were looking at China's highly repetitive, almost overly amped up national narrative.
Yeah, there's that Chinese internet slang for it, right?
Yeah, Jixi, which means pumped with chicken blood.
Pumped with chicken blood. That's a visual.
It is, and it's basically the big lie theory, but applied to this extreme, modern, high-tech state.
And when we say big lie, we have to be clear. We're referencing the tactics historically attributed to Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels, the strategy of just simple, exaggerated lies repeated over and over and over.
Right. And the historical context is, of course, vastly different. We are absolutely not equating the ideologies.
No, not at all.
But the tactic,
Yeah.
that strategy of relentless repetition, is key. You hear slogans like the Great Rejuvenation, system superiority, or that constant message that the West is trying to oppress us.
Right.
They're designed to be so simple and just everywhere that they drown out any complex or critical voices, both inside and outside the country.
But here's the duality, right? The central tension we really need to dissect. That exact repetition acts as this incredibly efficient glue domestically.
Adhesive.
It strengthens internal unity, regime stability. But then when it's projected outward, especially on sensitive topics like Taiwan, it becomes an aggressive repellent. It creates what critics call this perpetual propaganda bubble.
And that's our objective today, to really perform an analysis of this narrative double-edged sword. Why would a powerful country stick with a communication strategy? We're going to use historical comparison, deep international legal analysis, and political logic to give you the objective facts. We want to give you the tools to understand not just what they're saying, but why they have to keep saying it.
Okay, let's unpack this and start with the blueprint for this whole narrative strategy. You mentioned the big lie theory, and I think it's so important we frame this psychologically and historically first.
Yes, absolutely crucial. The big lie, or gross luge, is often incorrectly attributed directly to Hitler, but it was Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, who really systematized it as a core strategy for state control.
And the core idea is that the lie has to be just massive, so outrageous and repeated so relentlessly that the public just kind of gives in.
It's a psychological blind spot. It leverages this human tendency we all have toward, cognitive ease.
It's not just the old saying, a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. It's that the sheer scale of it defies your internal logic. It forces you to think.
No one could be that shameless. No one could invent something this enormous unless there was some truth to it.
Yeah, the outrageousness itself gives it this weird, perverse credibility.
Precisely. And the goal is not rational debate. It's about control and governing thought. As political scientists who analyze this stuff note, the focus is on being totally comprehensive and omnipresent.
So it doesn't even matter if the information is true or new. It just has to be the only information you can get your hands on.
Yes. Dominating every media channel, every classroom, every conversation. It's about suffocating dissent through sheer volume.
Which brings us to the psychological engine that makes it all work. And this is key for you to recognize in your own life. The illusory truth effect.
The illusory truth effect. It's a core pillar of modern cognitive psychology, and it perfectly explains how this kind of state propaganda can be so effective.
So put simply, it's that repeated exposure to any statement, even a false one, makes it start to feel familiar.
Right. And because the human brain is, a bit lazy, it likes familiar pathways, it often confuses that feeling of familiarity with objective credibility.
Yeah.
With truth.
So even if I read a detailed fact check yesterday that debunked a claim, if the official media and billboards and social media are all still screaming the original simple claim.
Like Taiwan has belonged to China since ancient times.
Right. That familiarity starts to just override the facts. It stops being about critical thinking and becomes more about a habit of recognition. It just feels right.
Think about the common narratives you hear. The endless hammering of the U.S. is deliberately trying to contain China, or only the party can guarantee stability. These aren't just informational claims. They're behavioral commands disguised as historical facts. They suppress your critical impulse by making the statement feel like the inevitable background noise of daily life.
And to achieve this, it required a huge pivot. It led to what analysts call the CCP's grand strategic shift, because for years, China's message was actually pretty defensive.
Absolutely. If you look back to the early 2000s, the whole message was peaceful rise.
I remember that.
State media was constantly saying China was not seeking hegemony and wasn't a threat. They were trying to manage fears abroad while they focused on their own economy.
But then we see this radical Xi-era turn, a shift from that passive defense of just telling China's story to something much more aggressive.
A proactive definition.
Yeah.
Constructing the Chinese narrative system. It's a fundamental change in their whole geopolitical posture.
It's basically an ideological declaration of war.
It is. The goal is no longer just to prove China is harmless. It has leaped to this massive global challenge to prove that the entire Western model of liberal democracy is obsolete, that it's failing.
And on the flip side, to establish that the Chinese model, with the party at the center, is the superior, more stable, more moral leader for the future.
They're trying to position concepts like the community of shared future for mankind, not just as some nice diplomatic phrase, but as a universal standard for how to govern.
It's all grounded in their own political doctrine. The Chinese path, Chinese theory, Chinese system, Chinese culture. It's an explicit attempt to build an ideological fortress that can't be touched by outside democratic criticism.
Now, when external analysts look at the actual rhetoric, this is where it gets a little strange. The language is often described as, on one hand, endlessly flowing and rousing, which sounds powerful. But at the same time, it's also called long, repetitive, empty, and lacking focus.
Well, that's what happens when you prioritize control over content, right? If the main goal is just repetition to establish authority, then things like novelty or depth or humor, they're not just irrelevant, they're actually dangerous.
Why is that?
Because complexity breeds questions, simplicity breeds adherence.
Exactly. And the ultimate effect of this whole style is to manufacture common sense.
Right.
They want their core assertions, like the party's right to rule, or that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, to become so self-evident that they're just social consensus.
So if it's common sense, then questioning it isn't just a political debate anymore.
It's an act of sedition. It's treason against the national spirit. This is the Goebbels blueprint, but adapted for a high-tech, centralized modern state.
So we've laid out the architecture and the psychology of this relentless narrative. Now let's shift to the outcomes, where we see this stark contrast between its success at home and its pretty dramatic failure abroad.
Let's start with the intended result. Internal success. The efficient adhesive.
Right.
For a nation as huge and complex as China, a unified narrative is absolutely essential for what they call political legitimacy plus social stability. It's the glue holding the whole thing together.
And it serves a huge function in managing crises. The mechanism gives people an officially approved way to understand global chaos. You know, you think about the trade wars, the economic slowdowns, international criticism.
Precisely. Instead of citizens feeling anxious about complex things they can't control, like global supply chains or maybe internal policy mistakes, the narrative channels that anxiety into clear, approved directions. Usually that means blaming external forces. It focuses on national destiny, external threats like the mythical black hand of foreign forces, and the need for patriotic unity.
It's incredibly effective because it gives people that strong nation imagery, that patriotism, which acts as this powerful emotional buffer against their own uncertainties.
Totally. When young people are facing a tough job market, the promise of the Great Rejuvenation gives them a sense of purpose that's bigger than just their financial situation.
And the data seems to back this up, right, in terms of internal effectiveness.
It does. I mean, there are definitely pockets of discontent, propaganda fatigue, especially among the highly educated in big cities. But overall support for the stronger, more aggressive rhetoric, especially on issues like Taiwan, it remains exceptionally high.
What are the numbers?
Analyses from domestic social media platforms suggest anywhere from 60 to 70% of netizens voice strong support for these hardline stances.
So for the regime, the calculation is simple. The strong talk stabilizes the leadership by creating this constant sense of crisis and national destiny. It tells the public, we're strong, but enemies are everywhere, and the party is the only one who can navigate us through the storm.
And the cost of international isolation? Well, for now, it's deemed acceptable when you weigh it against the benefit of domestic control.
Okay, so let's flip the coin and look at the other side. External failure. The powerful repellent.
This is the wolf warrior diplomacy era. And that aggressive style has just systematically destroyed China's international soft power.
The irony is it's painful. The very thing that works so well at home, that aggressive nationalist rhetoric that the domestic audience loves, has come at the long-term cost of international trust.
And we have hard data showing this erosion. You look at global surveys, for instance, done across 19 countries by places like Pew Research. They consistently show record high levels of distrust and increasingly negative views toward China.
And what's driving that?
Overwhelmingly, it's concerns over human rights, aggressive international actions, and just general diplomatic bullying. The rhetoric is seen as hostile posturing, not sincere diplomacy.
Okay, let me challenge you on that for a second. If the party's #1 priority is stability at home and achieving its goals, like Taiwan, why should they even care about soft power? Isn't isolating the West kind of a feature, not a bug, of their current strategy?
That's a crucial question. And the analysis suggests that even the CCP is starting to realize that this isolation is hitting their core interests.
How so?
They might not care what the U.S. thinks of them, but isolation hits two vital areas: foreign direct investment and their supply chain vulnerability. When your diplomacy is that aggressive, it makes foreign companies really nervous.
Right, it signals high political risk.
Exactly. When Beijing uses coercion against countries like Australia over trade or Lithuania over Taiwan, it tells investors worldwide that the environment is unstable. They need some level of global integration to keep their economy going, and the wolf warrior style actively sabotages that.
So the international audience sees the rhetoric not as dialogue, but as political theater for a domestic audience. And when the strong words don't match the actions, like saying peaceful cooperation while doing coercive things, the world just focuses on that inconsistency.
And nowhere is that failure more obvious than in the Taiwan litmus test.
This is the perfect case study of the propaganda bubble bursting. In an open, democratic society like Taiwan, where information flows freely, those repetitive, high-level narratives from Beijing they just bounce right off.
They're inoculated. The messages don't resonate because Taiwan's whole democratic framework is the direct opposite of that centralized control narrative.
And the polls show it. Support for unification is at historic lows.
Consistently. Data often shows that 90% or more of Taiwanese citizens hold unfavorable views of the PRC government. It's a complete repudiation of the narrative's effectiveness.
People in Taiwan don't see this as an attempt at dialogue. They see it as what it is: cognitive warfare.
It's a foreign invasion of their informational space. And that's why the propaganda attempts are so often met with ridicule instead of fear.
Right. You mentioned that absurd example from the military exercises.
And autistic love-bombing naval patrol.
I mean, it sounds less like military intimidation and more like a rejected idea for a really, really bad romantic comedy.
The sources suggest it's a mixed bag. They're spending more money, but the quality control is low because the system rewards loyalty and volume, that repetition we talked about, not subtlety or effectiveness.
So you get things like those low-quality deepfake videos trying to spread rumors about Taiwanese politicians fleeing to the U.S.
And they get called out instantly by fact-checkers as low-level deception, which just destroys their credibility even more.
So the conclusion is crystal clear. For external audiences, especially democratic ones, the narrative is a strategic burden. It actually reinforces democratic commitment and deepens the sense of a separate Taiwanese identity.
Let's shift gears from psychology to objective legal analysis. This part is vital because the credibility of the entire Chinese national narrative rests on certain legal and historical claims that international law pretty systematically refutes.
This is where we use the facts to pick apart the claims. And we have to start with the foundational one, deconstructing the Taiwan sovereignty claim.
Right. The CCP's core legal basis rests almost entirely on political statements from World War II. They lean very heavily on the 1943 Cairo Declaration and the 1945 Potsdam Proclamation.
And those basically said that territory stolen by Japan, like Taiwan, should be returned to China. That feeds the domestic narrative of historical justice.
It does. But historical intent is not the same as a legal transfer of sovereignty.
Well, that's the key point, isn't it?
It's the whole point. The critical counter-argument from international law scholars is that the Cairo and Potsdam declarations are classified as wartime communiques. They are statements of political intent.
So they're expressions of allied goals.
But they lack the formal legal power of a treaty, which is the established requirement under international law for a transfer of sovereign territory.
So relying on those gives them a great moral story at home, but it's a very weak foundation in a neutral international court.
Very weak. The key legal document, and this is what everyone should focus on, is the 1951 San Francisco Peace Treaty.
That was the definitive post-war legal agreement with Japan.
Exactly. In it, Japan formally ceded all claims to Taiwan. But, and this is the crucial ambiguity that keeps the status undecided, it did not name the recipient of the sovereignty.
That deliberate ambiguity is the entire basis for the Taiwan status is undetermined argument. It took away Japan's right to Taiwan, but didn't actually give that right to either the PRC or the ROC government.
That silence was a geopolitical reality. The Allied powers just couldn't agree on which Chinese government, the communists or the nationalists, should be the legal heir. The PRC, of course, tries to say the treaty is illegitimate because they weren't invited, but it remains the final legal word on Japan's relationship to the island.
And what about the U.S. position? Because that's often misinterpreted as accepting the PRC's claim.
A vital clarification. The U.S. position has always been subtle but firm. In its 3 communiques with the PRC, the U.S. has never acknowledged or accepted PRC sovereignty over Taiwan.
It just acknowledged the position.
It merely acknowledged the Chinese position that Taiwan is part of China, meaning they recognize that the PRC claims it. Acknowledging a political claim is fundamentally different from legally accepting that claim.
That distinction is the legal firewall that protects the status quo.
Okay, now let's move to a much simpler self-inflicted wound, Hong Kong as the ultimate warning.
This provides the most direct evidence against the viability of the one country, two systems model that they promised to Taiwan.
This is arguably the most damaging case for the CCP's international credibility because it involves a document with zero legal ambiguity. The 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration was not a political statement. It was a legally binding international treaty registered with the UN.
A treaty that guaranteed a high degree of autonomy for 50 years.
And in the past few years, we've watched that autonomy be systematically dismantled. The national security law, the arrests of activists, the restructuring of the entire electoral system.
Right.
The UK Foreign Secretary publicly declared Beijing's actions like disqualifying legislators were a clear breach of that legally binding commitment.
So the implication for Taiwan is just. It's unshakable. If the CCP is willing to openly ignore a legally binding international treaty when it conflicts with their desire for absolute control,
then there is zero reason for anyone in Taipei or any other government to trust a similar non-binding promise like one country, two systems.
It proves that for the CCP, international treaties are just temporary tools, disposable when they get in the way of total political security.
Let's shift to the sea now, where actions constantly defy global norms. We're talking about global norm defiance in the South China Sea.
This is the most overt example of them dismantling their own narrative of being a responsible global power.
The core issue is China's open disregard for the 2016 Hague Arbitral Tribunal ruling under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS.
And that ruling found that China's expansive claims, like the 9-dash line, had no legal basis. And the ruling is internationally binding.
But China refuses to even participate. They just declare the ruling illegal and void. They act like it never happened.
And their actions on the water reflect that.
Totally. They continue to impose unilateral fishing bans that cover huge parts of the Philippines and Vietnam's exclusive economic zones, the ruling affirmed belong to those nations. It's economic coercion on top of territorial coercion.
And the military component is getting more and more alarming. We see reports of these dangerous encounters at sea all the time.
All the time. Chinese enforcement vessels, the Coast Guard, the maritime militia, they systematically engage in dangerous actions against foreign ships, high-speed maneuvers, blocking, using water cannons. These actions explicitly violate international maritime collision rules, called call regs, which govern safe passage. This isn't a one-off mistake. It's a systemic challenge to the entire dispute resolution mechanism of international law.
And finally, we have to talk about the economic side. The proclaimed community of shared future for mankind versus the reality of economic coercion and debt traps.
The rhetoric of mutual development, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, sounds really appealing to developing nations who need infrastructure.
But the reality on the ground often severely contradicts that narrative.
Critics, including Western governments and NGOs in those countries, describe the BRI not as a partnership but as a predatory strategy.
What does that mean in practice?
It often takes the form of unsustainable, non-transparent loans designed to burden countries with debt they can't possibly service. And these loans are frequently secured against vital national assets, like ports or key infrastructure. This allows Beijing to gain political leverage or even strategic control when the countries inevitably default. That's not mutual development. It's geopolitical debt leverage.
And their standard trade practices often violate their WTO commitments.
Constantly. Systemized intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer for any foreign company that wants to operate there, massive subsidies to their domestic firms that let them undercut competitors globally.
All of which destabilizes the economies of other countries.
And this economic pressure is used as a diplomatic weapon. They use access to their massive market to coerce foreign governments, even businesses, into compromising on completely unrelated political issues.
Right. So the message is, if you want to sell your cars in China, your government better not host the Dalai Lama.
Precisely. It's economic coercion elevated to a standard tool of diplomacy.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. To understand why they're willing to pay the price of this isolation, we have to look past modern geopolitics and recognize that their methods come from a shared historical playbook, what you call the totalitarian toolkit.
Exactly. This means drawing parallels between the operational methods of the CCP and, yes, historical totalitarian rule like Nazi Germany. And we have to be very clear. We are focusing strictly on shared mechanisms for maintaining power, not shared ideology.
We're looking at universal patterns of repression.
That's it. Let's start with the central pillar, the personal cult.
In Nazi Germany, you had the Führerprinzip, the idea of absolute loyalty to Hitler, where his will was supreme law overriding everything else.
And we see a sophisticated parallel in the CCP's emphasis on the two establishes. It's a technical concept, but it's crucial for understanding how things work internally.
Can you break down what those two establishments are?
Certainly. First, establishing Comrade Xi Jinping's core status within the party. And second, establishing the guiding role of his thought. These are not just slogans, they are mandatory political requirements.
And how does that translate into actual governance?
It means mandatory loyalty oaths, constant political study sessions at every level of government, and severe punishment for any official who deviates from the core line. This personal cult, enforced through all state media and education, builds a similar layer of loyalty that makes the leader unchallengeable.
Next up, the essential tool for any regime that wants total unity, enemy creation.
Goebbels' propaganda dehumanized Jewish people, labeling them parasites or a cancer on Germany, which justified their persecution. It let the state blame its problems on a vulnerable internal group.
The CCP uses a similar mechanism, but it's broader. It labels critics, human rights lawyers, independent journalists, and specific ethnic or religious groups, Uyghurs, Falun Gong, Tibetan activists as splitists or subversive forces.
And that narrative serves two vital functions. First, it externalizes any internal discontent by claiming the state is under constant attack from foreign powers and their domestic collaborators.
Right.
And second, it justifies brutal internal suppression by reframing human rights concerns as necessary security measures against terrorism or separatism.
And then, of course, there's the need for an information monopoly.
Goebbels had the propaganda ministry, which controlled every single radio station, film, and newspaper. The CCP has the Central Propaganda Department and the massive institutionalized Great Firewall.
Both aiming for total monolithic control over the flow of information.
Because if you can't see alternatives, You can't even imagine them.
But again, we have to stress the crucial distinctions here. We are comparing methods and patterns of repression. We are not making a moral equivalence between the ideologies themselves.
Absolutely not. The ideological roots are completely distinct. Nazism was race-based fascism.
Yeah.
The CCP is rooted in Marxist-Leninism that's evolved into authoritarian state capitalism. The point is that these are universal patterns of repression that maximize centralized control, no matter what ideological banner you fly.
And the CCP has achieved the digital upgrade of the totalitarian toolkit, far beyond anything historical regimes could have imagined.
They've weaponized technology in a way that is incredibly difficult to escape.
Yeah.
You have sophisticated spamouflage bot networks for digital harassment. You have highly realistic deepfakes to discredit political targets.
And of course, the social credit system and the omnipresent surveillance network, Skynet.
That Skynet system, with its mix of HD cameras, AI facial recognition, and big data integration. It's a high-tech version of the totalitarian Iron Fist. Dissent isn't just censored. It's actively preempted through this pervasive monitoring that affects every part of your life.
So let's apply this toolkit analysis to one of the most sensitive areas. Human rights, specifically the narrative around Xinjiang. The CCP frames its policies there as necessary anti-terrorism measures coupled with economic development.
That is the official narrative we hear repeated endlessly on the global stage.
But it completely collapses under international scrutiny.
The evidence is just too overwhelming. UN reports from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights confirm credible evidence of massive arbitrary detention and reliable evidence of torture of Uyghur and other Turkic Muslim groups. They even noted that the system of internment may constitute crimes against humanity.
And the response from democratic parliaments has been even stronger, hasn't it?
Yes. Several parliaments in the Czech Republic, France, Canada, the UK have passed resolutions labeling the actions as genocide or crimes against humanity.
And those labels are applied because of the evidence of systemic abuses that go way beyond counterterrorism.
Right. Things like forced sterilizations targeting Uyghur women to reduce birth rates, the mass separation of families, and forced labor schemes that integrate detainees into manufacturing supply chains.
And here's a striking detail that just completely refutes the anti-terrorism claim. The systematic process of changing culturally significant Uyghur village names.
Replacing names like Hajj Road or Dutar Musician Lane with names that conform to CCP ideology, like Unity or Happiness.
That right there confirms the aim is cultural erasure, not just security. The goal is the destruction of a unique cultural identity and its total political assimilation into the Han majority narrative.
And that directly contradicts the CCP's own proclaimed narrative of equality, mutual learning, and inclusion. It reveals the true aim: total control enforced through coercion and surveillance.
Wow. We've covered psychological warfare, the complex ambiguities of international law, and these chilling parallels in historical totalitarian governance. That was a high-intensity conversation.
What really stands out to me is that the CCP's core narrative is a grand strategic deception, focused ruthlessly on regime security and its own unilateral ambitions. And it's successful internally because of that totalitarian toolkit and the illusory truth effect.
But the reason it's a double-edged sword, the reason it isolates them, is the massive systemic gap between its declared narrative of peace and cooperation and its actions, which show military coercion and blatant defiance of international law.
The rhetoric works as a glue at home, but its aggressive nature and lack of credibility make it a powerful repellent abroad, especially to democratic governments that prioritize rule of law and human rights.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you try to navigate global news?
Here's the final provocative thought. The crucial test for you when analyzing China's international stance is to focus not on the rhetoric, the beautifully crafted speeches about a shared future, but on action consistency.
So any diplomatic outreach, any promise like one country, two systems, or any new trade agreement, it has to be rigorously judged against the systemic breakdown of previous legally binding commitments.
Look at the clear breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration on Hong Kong. Look at the persistent defiance of the 2016 South China Sea ruling. Actions speak louder than the most repeated propaganda.
That's it for this really comprehensive talk. Thank you for tuning in and engaging with us.
If you enjoyed this analysis and want to stay ahead of the curve on global issues, make sure you subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you listen.
And as always, a big shout out to our friend Micky. Don't forget to check out Micky's YouTube channel, Micky to Life, for some fun memes and the latest travel vlogs.
We'll see you next time.